Hi guys, it's TheFrXion here, Tiger Tank 12, haven't called me, I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks, where we're today taking a look at the AMX CDA 105, or the AMX dassault 105, which is a French Tier A premium tank destroyer. And it's a pretty interesting one, because one of my absolute favorites for a while. Then they released the WZ121 GFT, or it was released, I think, quite closely to one another, and that thing kind of took the spot. But the AMX 105 actually has several interesting features. This is a very cool little tank that we basically never see in the French tank destroyer line, because none of the French tank destroyers are similar to it, at least in size and in the way you play it. They might be similar in the accuracy department, or the capability of dealing damage at longer ranges, but to be fair, the French tank destroyers are just very large targets. The AMX AC-4080 is just such a large tank, and basically it's just another Foch. But the AMX CDA 105 is such a small little nimble tank that it is like a fresh or a breath of fresh air for the French tank line, or for the French nation. So you have a 105mm gun, that's why it's called the 105, and it has 3 different shell types. The gun is probably going to be the superstar, as it always is with the tank destroyers. This time around, there is absolutely no difference. So you will carry about how many shells? Let me check real fast before I tell you something wrong. 40 shells, so you should have enough for the entirety of the game. You have 3 shell types: APCR, heat, and high explosive, so the best combination of the 3. You have very good APCR shells, like exceptionally good APCR shells. 260mm of penetration with them, and 1,525 meters per second shell velocity. That is 525 meters per second faster than the heat shells that you carry. They have 310mm of penetration and 1,000 meters per second shell velocity, which is still pretty good if you look into other heat shells, which fly a lot slower. But yeah, the APCR shells are pretty much the star of the show right there, with 260mm of penetration. The high explosive shell, on the other hand, well, they are just not going to be as good. 700 meters per second shell velocity and only 53mm of penetration. So this is not going to be the main reason you play this tank. Now, 390 alpha damage for a 105mm gun, that's about the norm. 260mm of average penetration, as I mentioned, is very, very good. And rate of fire is unfortunately not that great. Now, without any of the consumables, without Brothers in Arms, without the equipment that I'm using, it would probably fall down to a level of maybe 5.5 rounds a minute. And that means you're not going to be able to do that a lot damage in a short period of time. The gun loading time, as you can see, is 8.81 seconds. Gun traverse speed is not the best, but it's decent enough for a tank destroyer, 33.41 degrees per second. But since this tank only has 20 degrees of gun arc, 10 to the left, 10 to the right, it will not matter too much for you. The track traverse is going to be much more important. But 10 degrees, well, you're going to be able to switch around fast enough if you have to shoot something that is like 10 degrees on the right or the left of you. Most of the time you have to turn the hull of the tank, because obviously you only have 20 degrees of gun arc to the left and to the right. You have 8 degrees of gun depression, which is very nice. This tank can be used on ridge lines and it's quite effective. 20 degrees of gun elevation, which is very nice as well, something you will really rarely see on French tanks. If we have the AMX 50B, I'm gonna show you that real fast, just the 50B, because it's gonna show you the gun elevation is like 12 degrees, so it's like always very awkward when something is above the AMX 50B. The gun aim time is very, very good. As you can see, the dispersion is very, very good. As you can see, 0.25. It's an incredibly accurate tank, and it's supposed to be a ridgeline sniper, a tank that is very far away and that can still penetrate the tanks at that distance. 2657 DPM. As you can see, we've buffed it with a gun rammer, improved ventilations, brothers in arms, strong coffee, and a directive. Now, I am a player who has all of the resources, so I'm going to be using them nowadays, and that's how I'm running this tank. But if you take away all of that, well, your DPM is going to drop by quite a bit of a margin. Either way, tank gun is really, really good. Just doesn't have the DPM to really carry an entire flank by itself most of the time. 1000 HP, it's not a lot, and the tank's armor is also a little bit special. 100 millimeters thick at the front. With the angle in it, it's actually going to be bouncing quite a few rounds, but it has like this very large commander's cupola and the viewports, or the, I'm not sure if it's the rangefinders for the gunner. This place right here is a very easy target to hit and to penetrate. Now, if you have the side and the rear, it's a fast death most of the time. So do not go too aggressive with this tank, but if you have to go aggressively, there is a chance that you might bounce some lower tier opponents, maybe even some equal tier opponents. Now, the top speed on this tank is something else. 55 kph, and the specific power to weight is incredible. 26.25 horsepower per ton. This tank only weighs 32 tons max, and you can see the 720 horsepower engine you have on this tank makes this one accelerate incredibly fast. It's only 55 kph because with these kind of stats it could have been like a 60 to almost 70 kph vehicle, but Wargaming obviously had to balance it out, 55 kph. So that means this tank can be constantly on the move, and it is going to be quick on the move. It's going to be able to get into the spots very quickly, and it's going to be able to accelerate to top speeds very, very quickly. So that's very nice. It's a very different picture in the WZ-120. It's fast, yes, 50 kph, but it doesn't have the specific power to weight ratio that the AMX has, because the engine power is worse and it weighs more. So basically you're going to have less specific power to weight ratio. So the traverse speed is still decent enough, 38.41 degrees per second. You can make that work in just any kind of scenario. I think for a tank destroyer that's more than fine, and you shouldn't be circled too often. Now, concealment and spotting on this tank. Concealment is really, really good, but spotting is also going to be lacking, just like on the WZ-120. I do have the spotting specialization for the vents right there, but you cannot expect to have incredible view range unless you use some view range equipment. For example, you could always go with coated optics, but I didn't want to go with coated optics because I much rather have more DPM. Because I'm not trying to be spotting for my team, I'm trying to be shooting the tanks that my team spots for me. And I think that is a fair kind of way to see the AMX CDA 105. So I just changed over to crew training again because I don't need any more experience. Now let's talk about the equipment. Well, I went with improved rotation mechanism because I'm a tank destroyer that has a fixed gun in its hull. I want to have the max amount of turn rate that I can have, and you can never have enough, so I went with that. And I went with gun rammer to improve my DPM, and finally with improved ventilation because I didn't need improved aiming, I didn't need improved hardening, and I didn't need more speed or an enhanced gun lane drive because everything on this tank is already pretty damn good, considering the stats with the gun. So that's like my loadout, and that loadout has been doing fine by me. I went with reinforced suspension for better ground stats like soft ground, hard ground. You actually lose quite a bit of mobility when you go with lightweight suspension because the tank is just no longer able to turn on the spot as quickly as it should, and you can only see those hidden stats if you go to Tanks GG, unfortunately. They should be adding this into World of Tanks, but they haven't done it so far. Now, with parallax adjustment for a smaller aim, circle size, right angle periscope for more view range, and finally with scouting. And that's basically what I've taken, and I've been quite satisfied with it so far. This is a very nice tank. This is a tank that I like to play occasionally. I'm just not a very big fan of tank destroyer gameplay, so I always kind of go back to the medium tanks and the heavy tanks if I want to play like premiums. tank destroyers. I do own quite a bunch of them, but I'm not a very big fan of sitting back too much. And quite a few of those tank destroyers, you cannot be too active. The WZ-120 is a complete different vehicle, but you'll see that on the video that I make on the WZ-120. So I'd say without further ado, let's jump into a gameplay and see what the AMX CDA 105 is capable of when it's fighting anything on a ridgeline, and you actually use the strengths of the vehicle to your advantage. So let's jump into the game. Okay, so the gameplay I have for you today is when you're top tier in the AMX CDA 105. This is one of the two gameplays I have for you. The other one will be in the tier 10 matchup, or at least tier 9. Because in tier 6, 7, and 8, the AMX CDA 105 actually still has some pretty damn impressive armor. That's something that will no longer really work at tier 9 and 10 anymore, unfortunately for you. But yeah, this is a very interesting gameplay because it's really a close match. So hopefully you can see what the CDA 105 is capable of doing. Now the very first point I want to take is that we can almost keep up with the light tanks. Look at that, 55 kph is being reached constantly, and only going up the hill we lose quite a bit of speed, but this 26 horsepower per ton, the power to weight ratio is fairly impressive. It shows you just how quickly you can get from point A to B. We're going to be moving on over here to the open field, where we're trying to get a shot on the LT-432. I'm not too scared about being out in the open. It's an E25 who's firing full gold at me, but as I mentioned, the upper plate of this tank is actually quite competitive against these tier 7 and tier 6 opponents. But it does get a little bit more critical when we have to fight against the LT-432, especially depending on if he's firing AP or APCR, well, the premium AP shell. But it turns out, well, even APCR, standard APCR from LT-432 is not going to be enough to go straight through the front of the AMX CDA 105. If you look at the entire kind of design of this tank, I think it's rather nicely angled all over, so it's a bit awkward. Unfortunately, we just missed the opportunity to hit a Type 62 during that turnaround. And if you have watched my WZ-120 review, or if this review is coming out in front of, before my WZ-120 review, definitely take a look. You'll notice just how quickly the zoom in is when you're firing the CDA. It doesn't take very long to have that reticle small again, which unfortunately on the WZ-120 GFT is not the case. It does have better rate of fire, but it doesn't have that kind of accuracy and the quick kind of aim time that the CDA 105 has. Unfortunately for us, we're about losing quite badly at the moment. We've already lost 2 tier 8 tanks very early on in this match, and we just lost another tier 7 fighting this WZ-121 GFT. But he does make a very awkward play. I know he has very good reload time and he has some exceptional DPM, but what he is doing right now is a bit, well, aggressive. We bounce a shot from the AMX 1375, who just managed to turn around us, and thankfully we get a little bit of help from behind us from Scorpion and the Scorpion, one of them being the tier 7 American tank destroyer, the other one the tier 8 German tank destroyer. But we get a very nice shot on the TVP who is sitting on the bridge, who doesn't care about anything but shooting the T25 AT. And this is where you can actually see just how nice this tank is. You don't have to worry about anything with penning, 260mm of penetration. Rate of fire is decent enough, but it's not the highest DPM. Now the WZ-120 GFT in this situation would probably given us a lot more damage, and we would have bounced probably just as much as we have done here. And unfortunately for us, we just bounced a Leo. Don't know exactly where we shot him, but it must have been a very awkward angle, or we hit his tracks. We don't want to lose any more HP since we only have 1000 HP in total and we only have 163 HP left. We're basically a one-shot to the Leo and probably a two-shot for the Panther. This is now a very awkward game because you can see that the enemy team has taken over the B line. They have taken over the heavy tank spot, except for the tunnels where we still have an IS-6B and T-103 fighting in the middle. But we just lose the IS-6B, and now we notice that we are looking at a very dire situation because we have to take matters into our own hands. Now, with the armor, as I mentioned already, the armor being already quite decent, we have very good mobility and a very punchy gun. So you have a very nice little setup. We just bounced another shot from the Panther right there, which was very essential because with a high roll, he could have killed us with that one shot. The question is just, what would I have preferred more? Like, I've just played this tank and the WZ-120 GFT, and I think both kind of have their own you know, preferences, and both have their own strong suits. And I think personally the AMX CDA 105 doesn't have the same alpha damage, it doesn't have the same reload time, but the CDA 105 just has this very, very good gun that is always almost 100% reliable in any situation. We just spotted Ikwagen 90B, and this is very weird because I hit the ridgeline right there, and this tier 7 tank destroyer who can do a lot of damage, you know, this tier 7 TD who that can really bring a lot of pain into the engagement, is just AFK. The Ikwagen 90, I have no idea why players go AFK when they're playing this game, especially at such a time in the game where it's essential to even have a single tier 7 tank to help you out, but it turns out it's just basically up for grabs, and you can see the amount of damage we do with a single shot is still pretty damn nice. Unfortunate for the enemy team, they have an Ikwagen 90B. Could be this computer crash, could be an internet shortage or power shortage. We don't know, and we don't even have to go too much into detail. But now we have a very awkward situation. We are 4 versus 3. We have turned this game around, and we have a charioteer, the E25, and the LT432. The E25 is probably the biggest worry for me personally, because I think the E25, if he does have a little bit of well, if he's an intelligent E25 player, he's probably gonna go somewhere with the charioteer, set up an ambush, wait for us, and then just you know, sit in a bush and be completely invisible. I do not want to get spotted by E25 and then get farmed by him, because even an E25 will be able to eventually penetrate our tank if he does get the weak spot. We did get very lucky at the beginning that we didn't take more damage, or else this game wouldn't have gone into this kind of direction. But now it's very important that the Scorpion G doesn't do something too rash. We know that somebody's capping, and now we've seen the E25. But it's essential for us that this E25 gets knocked out, because that rate of fire on the E25, if that Scorpion G just ignores him and he runs into the charioteer, he's going to be toast. Unfortunately for us, it looks like the E25 is going to do that, but it turns out that the Scorpion G turns around the turret and knocks him out in the last second, securing a kill, and we managed to evade the shot from the charioteer, giving us a very nice little game where we dealt 3,570 damage and we bounced quite a few shots. Now this is the tier 6, 7, and 8 kind of experience. When we're going up against tier 9s and 10s, this tank is very different. That's exactly what we're going to be taking a look at right now. Okay, so the second gameplay I want to show you guys is on the map Siegfried Line, and it should be something where the tank excels at, and that is sniping, but unfortunately RMG is not with us today. You'll see what I mean, and I wanted to talk about the general question of what is accuracy even in World of Tanks. And by the way, terrible driving by me. I just turned into the Panther. That happens when you have really good tractor burst. And then right there I tried to shoot past the Brigetto 46, but I forget there's a bunker right there. So please ignore the first 2 interactions I have with my teammates. I'm very glad that there's no team damage right there. But the accuracy in World of Tanks sometimes is really weird. One of the weirdest and the most annoying things you can have in this game is when you get a critical damage hit without any damage. I have no idea what just happened there. I actually don't even track the SU-130PM. I do hit that tank, but nothing happens. This tank has 260 millimeters of armor penetration, and I think the SU-130PM has about 40 to 30 millimeters of armor on the side, maybe less. So either way, I'll let Wargaming figure that one out. This tank has incredible accuracy and a very nice rate of fire, or a decent rate of fire and very good penetration. Right there, I was really surprised. Where did my shot go? Turns out somebody else was sitting right in front of the SU-130PM and ate that 105mm shell. Now, there is one thing that you can try, and it is deactivating the 25 times zoom. World of Tanks has this very weird system where when you use anything above 8 times zoom, you will have less accuracy. It's really weird because the circle is a lot larger when you are in 25 times zoom, and that means that your accuracy is actually worse. Right there you can see my shot actually went somewhere off into the wilds. I didn't hit anything. It's probably because of my connection to the server. Then the second shot hits the lower plate of the Pregato 46, once again not doing any damage, and then finally the last shot just goes into a dead Hulk that once used to be the Pregato 46. So an extremely frustrating experience at first, but I can promise you that this is not the norm whenever you're playing the AMX CDA 105. Usually the gun is very, very accurate and it is very reliable, just like right there with the guard. Do not forget, you have 1,525 meters per second shell velocity on the APCR shells, and you have 260 millimeters of penetration. That is basically levels of tier 10 medium tanks. Well, better than tier 10 medium tanks, because not a lot of tier 10 medium tanks have shell velocity of 1,500 meters per second. There are only a select few. Now, because we've been so passive, and the game is almost done, because World of Tanks in 2022 is a very short-lived game because it's very imbalanced. We are just going to be making our way into the city, and this is where you can see where the 260 millimeters of penetration come in very handy. Dealing with a KB5, even if you don't hit the weak spot, you can easily cut through the side armor and the front of the tank, and this is where the power to weight ratio comes in handy. Now, we haven't really tested the armor of this thing so far, but what you can see is that if you can hide behind a corner and you can drive backwards, you won't really have to have a problem with getting shot by a E50 or another tank, because the tank accelerates this quickly that you can just basically hide your vehicle away. And also, the turret armor, or the armor around the gun mantlet, is quite nice. It's very nicely angled. The E50 didn't manage to penetrate us right there, but he could have easily just taken care of us by hitting the cupola on top, or that little, line there of armor. Now, in the last stages of the game, you can see just that the speed of the vehicle does definitely help us to get into a position and to get some more damage. That's what you can do with the AMX CDA 105. That's something you might not be able to do with the Chinese WZ121GF. But what is also really nice is just the penetration of this tank. So why did I choose this gameplay, and what do I think of the AMX CDA 105? So this tank is really accurate, but sometimes even the most accurate tanks are getting absolutely destroyed by Wargaming's system of RNG. As you could see right there, we hit the SU-130PM I think twice, but we didn't do any damage to him, and sadly that's just something that will happen. The shots usually are on target, but when you're sniping, things can be really frustrating. I still think that the CDA 105 is a very good tank and is very accurate at range. So don't just judge it on this little gameplay that I had right here. This is a very accurate tank, but I wanted to show off what it actually feels like when everything goes against plan. In the end, we still had a very good game. We did 3,000 damage combined, no more than 3,000, because that one hit on the Predator 46 was actually also in there. We got counted, or it got added after the game. And this tank is fairly capable. It has great mobility. The only thing lacking with the mobility is more top speed. If you had 60 kph with this thing, you could have 64 kph with a turbo, and that would be insane. But the acceleration on this tank is on the level of a light tank. That is really, really good. So if you have a look at the mobility, you have a look at the armor, which is decent enough, which will be working in your favor sometimes, but you should definitely not rely on your armor completely. Then you have a very good punchy gun where you barely have to fire any gold shells. You have a very good premium tank in my opinion. Premium tank that is quite cheap to play, that is a lot of fun, it's quite mobile, and it's very, very small. If you look at the silhouette of the tank, it is actually a very small tank destroyer. Much more on the level of a light tank or a medium tank, and not on the level of a French tier 8 tank destroyer, which usually is about the size of the Semovente or even bigger. So I think this is a very nice tank, especially if you like mobile tank destroyer. I think the CDA 105 is probably already in your garage. But if you're looking for a French silent assassin that is good at long ranges but can also get in dirty if it needs to, I think the CDA 105 is certainly a very good choice. So yeah, I would probably give it an 8.5 out of 10. One of my favorite French premium tanks, one of my favorite French tank destroyers out there, and quite unique in my opinion. So, hope you guys did enjoy this review. As always, comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, have a good one.